probably had been a nurse maybe about 10 years or so. My partner, my wife, had cancer, and she was dying. We had two beautiful little boys, and as things were progressing and she was failing all treatment, I just cared for her at home. My best friend also had a terminal disease, and I moved him into the house too. So I would work 3 12-hour shifts, and I had someone come in and watch them, and I would go to work. But then on my days off, 4 days a week, I took care of my friend, my spouse, and then we had a 7 and 9 year old boys. And my friend died, and and then the boy's mother died. She had cancer, and it was just me then as a single dad with two young boys and working, and we got through it. Well, one day I was in the house. The boys were in the front yard. Boys were in the front yard playing, and and I heard this horrible noise, and and crashing and screaming, and what the heck is that? So I go out in the front yard, let's see what's going on. There's a car in the yard, and the neighbors are coming over and screaming and yelling, and ended up there was red everywhere. I'm thinking, what's that? I'm a nurse. I just withdrew totally from what happened in that situation, and I just stood there. What's going on? Why is there a yard in the yard? Why is there a car in the yard? And the neighbors are doing something and trying to pull something out from underneath the car. And then there was this inebriated man just walking around, like, what happened? And ended up the red that I saw was the blood of my sons. A drunk had lost control of the car and just drove right through our own front yard. Kids were playing in their own front yard, and he killed them, ran them right over. And I froze. I couldn't do anything. I was absolutely useless. And what wonderful neighbors I had. And yeah, they're trying to pull the bodies out, and they were stuck under the wheels. And they called for help, and just people came and they took over completely. I just stood there and just cried, and they were dead. So their mother died 3 months prior, and then they died, and I don't know. The in-laws came in and did all the funeral arrangements. I just was absolutely useless, and I couldn't go back to work. And I told my boss, and she said, take as much time as you can. And um, um, I never went to the funeral. I couldn't go. I couldn't. I've never been to their grave. This has been 35 years. This was 1989, and I just stayed in the house. I I couldn't do. I was absolutely useless. And with all the experiences I had had up to that time with spirit, you would think I would still, I would understand. Oh, they've gone on and everything's fine. But it was, a 7 and 9 year old, and screaming and laughing and everything throughout the day. And then all at once, the house was so silent. It was like screaming in silence. And it was just me. Everyone died. My friend, the mother, the kids. And I'm there alone. So I had wonderful friends, and they came over and just let me vegetate and brought food and took care of me. And I ended up sitting in the house for a solid year. I didn't go to work. I would look out the window every now and then and see cars drive by and people walking their dogs, and I would think, how are you guys having a life when my world stopped. There's absolutely no life left in my life. How are you guys doing this? So I had paint, gallons and gallons of paint. So I painted over the windows. I completely painted over. I had these great big picture windows, and completely painted out the whole world. It was just total darkness, and I sat in total darkness for a year. And my friends, my wonderful friends, and they never tried to get me to change or straighten up or whatever. They would just, come over and bring food, and I'd order pizza, and had a TV set. We got 3 channels, and I watched that, and I just sat in the house. I just froze. And then one day, it was early in the morning, about 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting again in total darkness and watching TV. And up in the corner of the room, it was like sparkles. It was like a sparkle. I don't know. We have them in America. You light them, and they're like silver little lights. And there's like these little sparkles, like diamonds. And they started appearing. There'd be a couple, and then a ton, and then loads of them. So maybe it was 4 feet wide, 1 feet tall. It was oblong shape, glittering, sparkling, white diamonds, lights. And I thought, oh my God, it's an electrical fire. Now what am I going to do? And I'm just staring at it, thinking, what, I can't leave the house. What, I guess I'll call the police or something, fire department or whatever. And then out of that bar of sparkles and light came 2 voices, and they were young executive men, maybe 27, 28 years old. They both had distinct voices, but very young, and they were very, very stern with me and started telling me off. And they said, listen, we've had enough of you. We've got so much work to do, so much important work. We have so many people relying on us, so much important endeavors that has been going on for a long time, and people are relying on us to get our jobs done. But we can't because of you, because you've been holding us back. Because of you. You. It's all about you. You're holding us back. We can't move forward. We can't do our job. And it's got to stop right now. And then when one would stop, the other voice would take over. And it says, yes, the only nice thing that was ever said was, we appreciate what you did for us. And instinctively, I knew it was my 2 boys. My 2 boys died at ages 7 and 9. But now, a year later, they sounded like very intelligent, well-educated young executives. And they just kept telling me off. You got to stop this. We're not going to put up with this one more minute. It's stopping now. You can't keep holding on to us. We got to go, and this is it. This is your only warning. This is the only time we're going to tell you, let go. Let go now. And they just told me off. It was like a bad police officer, pulling you over and letting you have it. And I'm thinking, like, yes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was, doing anything bad. I miss you so much. I can't tell you how bad I hurt that you're no longer here. And they didn't respond. It wasn't like, oh, Daddy, we miss you, we love you. They just told me off, one after the other. It just went on and on. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes. It seemed like a much longer because, I'm like, yes, sir, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll stop. Yes, I'll let you go. And then the sparkling got smaller and smaller and smaller. And tiny and tiny and tiny. And then finally it was just a couple sparks. And then I'm back in the darkness again. And it was my boys. My boys came back and told me off. I didn't realize I was mourning them so much. And I didn't realize that mourning them not only was holding me back and holding me in total darkness inside, I was evidently holding them in darkness too. I was holding them back from the life and the spiritual experiences that they're supposed to be having at this time. Missing someone's healthy, that's okay. But mourning someone is lethal. It's lethal for me, and it was lethal for my boys. I had no idea that my attachment not only limited my experience, but was limiting their experiences too. And I remember one night in a dream, it kind of came to me that I had turned myself into a living headstone for my two sons. When I buried them, I buried me too. And after this experience, I turned the headstone into stepping stones, and I was able to move on. That day, because of this, my attitude changed 160 degrees. And I called up my old job, and my boss had moved off, but everybody knew me. And I said, you know what, I need to come back to work. And they said, well, come on in, put in an application. So I had to call somebody up to come jump my car because they hadn't started my car in a year. And I got cleaned up and did my hair and shaved and got in the car and drove to work and put in an application. And they hired me right then and there. I started the next day after staying in the house for a solid year in total darkness. I mean, it really hurts your eyes going out in the light after that. I started work the next day, started back in orientation. It was that quick and that sudden of a healing that I got when my boys touched in with me. And what a glorious thing that was. When they freed me, they freed themselves. When I freed me, I freed them. We freed each other. And so I'm back home and I'm going to work, and soon I'm back into hospice because that was going to be my dedication after this. I was a very technical nurse prior to that. Now I wanted to work with the dying people, and I went to work with in the AIDS facility. But I had to deal with all this paint on the window, and I had these little tiny razor blades. And my friends came over and said, we'll help scrape it off. I said, no, this is something I need to do. And so it took months, little bit, little bit scraping off all these windows just full of paint. And the more I scraped off, the more the light came in. And I thought I could turn my back on the light. I thought I could paint it out. I thought I could paint the world and the universe and God and everything that is out. But all I did was just shut my eyes. And the more I scraped the paint off, and the more sun would be coming through, the light's always there. It's always there. It never turns off. It never turns away from you. You can shut your eyes. You can try to paint over it. You can turn your back against it. You can spray paint it. You can pull curtains. You can say, no, 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 it doesn't exist. It's there. It's there whether you accept it or not. And it's there for you. It's just waiting for you to, again, remove those blocks that separate you from it. And prior to this, I think I had my blocks pretty well removed because I had so many wonderful experiences. I tumbled on this one. Mourning. Mourning is lethal. And again, missing is healthy. Mourning is lethal. And I had to relearn that lesson to never turn away from the light again. No matter what else, it's the most important thing that can happen to you in your life and in your next life, wherever it is you are. And I scraped and scraped and scraped and finally opened up all the windows. And I have never, ever separated myself from the light again. And what a wonderful healing that was. What a wonderful, and I'm so blessed that I got to see my boys. I know they're fine. They're doing something. I've never seen them again. I never tried to call them back. I've learned after that. I don't want to get told off like that again. I know they're happy and they're doing stuff and they're having an adventure and they've got a purpose. That's you don't just float around playing harps up there. There's progress and growing and unfoldment constant. And oh, what a marvelous experience that was. I am so grateful. And That's the story about my boys. Loved ones, I think it's with everybody in the whole universe. And that connection is real. And though they had moved on and matured and gone to a whole other state of consciousness, still me holding on affected them. And that really gives me something to think about. When you think bad thoughts of somebody, or good thoughts, or any kind of thoughts, the power that has, that it goes to them, but also whoever else in the entire universe. We really need to watch what we think and feel, because those are real things. After this happened, I had another dream, and spirit kind of, it gives me funny little dreams, and I have to think about, what are you trying to show me? And I had somebody at work that I worked with, and he was very mean to people, very mean to each other, and I would just wave at him and smile. And if he was mean to me, you know, I buried my kids. You know, no one, no one can upset me after that. And in a dream, I saw him, and he was walking down a street, and he was cussing somebody out and telling him off. And then in the dream, I saw him laying in the gutter, and the person he was cussing out was standing on the sidewalk. In the dream, they were both on the sidewalk, but all at once he was in the gutter. And my spirit, the feeling I got, and I try not to intellectualize, I try to feel, because to me, spirit comes in moods and feelings and impressions. And the feeling was spirit, our soul, we as soul, can only look one way, and that's up. We can only look up. We can only look to that divine source. It's an illusion to think you can look down. This came to me in the dream. It's an illusion to look down. You can only look up. So in the dream, when he was cussing this person off on the sidewalk, and then all at once he's in the gutter, it hit me. When he looks down on people, he's actually just below them. He has now placed himself below them, because spirit can only look up. And whenever you look down on anybody, you have just placed yourself below them, because spirit can only look up to God. It can only look up to the universe, or whatever you want to call it. It can't look down. And from that, I've always watched every single word and thought and feeling that I've had. And if something negative comes through, I just throw it off and say, I make a little joke about it and laugh it off. Somebody's mad at me, well, big deal, so what? It gives us an opportunity to build a deeper, better relationship down the road. See people as high as you possibly can in spirit, as their true form, as little sparks of God, like the little twinkly things that I saw when my boys were on this thing. I don't know what it was. Was that their soul? I don't know. But whenever you see anybody or everybody as high as possible, you're just like that much below them. You're up there too. And if you see people down as, low and undeserving or whatever, you're just that much below them. You've placed yourself. It's your choice. There's so many things you can't choose in life, but you can choose where you place your attention. You can choose the attitude that you're going to have, how you're going to react to a situation, and you can choose when, where, and how you change where you put your attention. You can put it on something higher or something lower, but actually you can't put it on lower, because you're just below it. No matter everything in the universe is between you and God. That's the connection we have. And that's just been life-changing. What a simple little thing that is. I mean, it's profound, but it's also very, very simple. I think the universe keeps things incredibly simple. You can say the truth of the universe probably in just a couple sentences, not books and books and books and all these things that people write, trying to make a living or whatever. I think the universe just keeps it very simple. Love each other, look up, hold to the hand of your friend. When someone stumbles, grab their hand and lift them up. What simple little things. That's all there is. And eventually, when this is over, we move on to something bigger and greater. And that's what I've gotten out of life. And all my wonderful, incredible experiences. And I thank the universe for every single one of them, including the loss of my boys. I couldn't be there to protect them. I couldn't hold them or hold their hands when they took their last breath. But as 17 years as a hospice nurse and 20 years as an emergency room nurse, and then I spent 5 years as a burn nurse, and I could take care of those people. I could hold their hands when they took their last breath, or their mothers or fathers or their children or whatever. I was blessed with the opportunity to be able to support people, spirit moving on to the next level, and then how it affected all their loved ones that were around them. It's been an absolute blessing. I am so glad I became a nurse. But anybody else in any other field, you can do the same thing too, because everybody's stumbling or not stumbling and going through life, and you can just choose at any moment to see people as soul in the highest level, the purest form that they actually are, not as their bodies, but see them as soul. And you're just like a slice of paper below them. This is my interpretation. This is me. I try not to interpret much, but this just feels right. This just feels like this is the way it's set up.
I live on a farm and we pasture graze beef, and these cattle became a big part of my story. And I've lived on a farm all my life. And so I've been accustomed with working with animals, livestock in particular. Uh, every morning, every morning, I would typically go out to the pasture to just check on them, to visually inspect. And because I had been close enough with those animals over a long period of time, I could get amongst them just, as they're grazing, and they wouldn't even bother to look at me. I mean, it was just a comfortable symbiotic relationship with the animals. That morning, and this was in an early October morning, I walked out there to the pasture just to inspect them, and they were all lying down in the grass. And I didn't get 300 feet to them, and one of them jumped up and looked at me and perked her ears, like cattle will do when they see something they're not sure of, and took off running at a fast pace about 600 feet away, and stopped and turned around and looked at me. And I thought, well, this is really unusual because it's never happened before quite like that. Well, all of her commotion caused the others to pay attention, and they got up very quickly, looked at me to see what it was, and they took off to join the other one that had first run. I thought, this has never happened. What's going on? But I kind of shrugged my shoulders and thought, well, it's kind of an unusual morning. And I saw what I had to see, so I left. I turned around and I walked back towards, across the pasture towards our house. That morning I was scheduled to have the tires on our car replaced. So I got changed and went into our local village, which was 12 miles away. I realized I was very early and I had time to go to an exercise session. I had been going for the previous 6 months, 8 months, to our local hospital's fitness center as a trying to get to a point where I could lower my blood pressure. Now, historically, I'd never had high blood pressure, but in the previous 8 to 10 months, it had steadily increased. So they put me on an exercise program and a diet, and I was going there 3 times a week. Well, instead of turning right to go to get the car tires changed because I had extra time, I turned left and I went to our local fitness center, and which is run by our local hospital. I went downstairs, changed, came back up, said hello to the 5 staff people that were in the room, as I usually did when I was there. And I did my stretches and went and did 20 arm curls. I got up from that arm curl machine, and the strangest thing happened. Both of my forearms started to tingle, like when you lie on them and they go to sleep on you, and then you get up and they all tingle. Well, both of them were like that. And I thought, this is really unusual. And that happened to be the last thing I remember for at least the next 8 hours. I'll come back to it, but I did find out later all of the things that were going on in the room after my collapse. But in that moment, after I realized my arms were tingling, my next memory is of being in a different dimension. And I know that because I was sitting on, to use a human term for what I was on, would be like a raft, a small raft where I was floating. But I wasn't floating on water. I was floating on energetic waves that were coming towards me. And not only were they coming towards me, they were going through me. And I thought, well, this is really, really interesting, but I have no idea where I am. And as I sat there and just watched as these waves came in, I felt all this unconditional love. That's the best way I can express it. It was warmth. It was welcoming. It was the greatest thing I could feel if I were physically present. It was just a very welcoming atmosphere. So I looked around to my sides, and there were others, or other entities, doing the same thing, floating on these waves of energy that were continually coming from in front of us as we understand direction, passing through and continuing on back. And I thought, well, I guess I'm not here by myself, but I don't know who all these other entities are. It was at that point I looked up to see what was in front of me. And as I looked up, I could look through my hands. What were, to my sense at that point, my energetic hands, because they were translucent, because the waves were passing through them as well. It would be like having a hologram of yourself and being able to see through it and still realize that you were yourself, but in a different form. Well, when I looked up, I did not see any clouds. I did not see any borders. I did not see any walls, no barriers. It was the biggest amphitheater I had ever witnessed or could witness. It was just immense as in eternal. It went on in all directions. But yet, in the center of all this would be what I can best describe as a golden globe that was emanating all of this energy, that waves that I could see that were passing through and beyond. And looking at this pulsating golden globe of, I mean, if you put 10 million suns together, that doesn't even cover it. But it was such a warm, welcoming presence. I mean, I could actually, even though I thought I was a distance away from it, I could reach out and touch it as if I were one with it and not get burned up. Um, so the other thing I saw besides these waves were little, what I would call little energetic sparkles or sparks coming out in all directions. I mean, they were flying all over. And I thought, well, this is some source because everything is emanating from it. All this energy, all of these other entities are sitting here, almost, you know, becoming part of it again. And there were others coming out of it, or maybe other things. I had no idea. And uh, what I realized then was that this was uh, a source of all creation. Something was creating it. It was, if you will, a God essence. And I use that term mainly because it's easier for an explanation of what I saw. A divine creator, whatever term you want to apply to something that is that immense, that welcoming, that flow of love, that knowledge. Because at the time I sat there, all of a sudden I realized, well, this is what it is. This is all knowledge in front of me. And when when I saw these little sparks come out, I just kind of turned to see, and they were all going into the area, the dimension behind me, which is when I decided to turn around and take a look to see what was behind me, because it'd be like going on a trip and not taking a look at a side road. And so I turned around, and the best way I can describe it is to say I saw eternity. And by that I mean, it was like there was this emulsion of energy that as it flowed and formed and let energy through, it still created like a magnification of what I was looking at in the distance. And the ironic thing is, the farther I looked, the clearer it became, which in human terms is really not possible. But I realized at that point, I didn't know I was dead. I didn't know that my body was still back down at the fitness center. I was just here in this place that felt so comfortable, so welcoming, so loving, that, yeah, it was so great. And the other interesting thing I saw in this whole dimension, whether we call it up, down, sideways, north, south, front, back, take your pick. Those are human terms we use so we can have some sort of common agreement as direction. What I saw were universes beyond human comprehension, infinite. And the best way I can explain it is if you think about taking the universe that we are presently in here on this planet, and you compress everything, all the billions of light years across and everything, you compress that down to a single sheet of paper, and then you suspend it out here in this eternal dimension. And then you have another one right next to it, another one right next to that, another one right next to that, as you're going in one direction. And then you go in the other direction and you have all these other universes lined up. And then you have them, as we understand, up and down and sideways and lengthwise. Each one of these universes had a filament that were going back to this gigantic source, this God essence in front of me. So the energy that I was feeling was also being filtered and directed into all of these other universes. And it was it wasn't as if I had to acknowledge it, because I knew that this is how we were created, this is how we are sustained, and this is where I came from. Now, I can't prove that and quantify it, but it's what I experienced. And I'll come back to the rest of it, but I just want to go off on a little side thing here. I know it's true. I know my experience is true, because if you think about, everyone has dreams. And when you have a dream at night, sometimes in the morning you wake up and think, well, that was weird. Or you think that, I wish I could remember what it was about. Dreams have this unique thing about dissipating in front of us. They're like a fog that disperses. So a lot of dreams that I have now, I can't remember. However, I can remember exactly everything that I experienced in that dimension, and I brought it back with me. I don't know how, and I don't know if there's more to it than that, but that is why I can explain what I saw, because it is with me all the time. In fact, it's gotten to the point now, several years later, where I don't even have to close my eyes to think about it, because I can see it in the background of everything that I look at. I can see it in the background of you. I can see it in the background of the person or people that I talk with here. It's not something that is distressful. It's very comforting, because I know that I am just a moment away from experiencing that whole dimension again. So at that point, it came to where 8 hours later, I realized I was in a hospital. And that's when a lot of the confusion started, because I was in this wonderful experience, and now I'm in a hospital looking at the clock, and it says 8 o'clock on the wall. And I said, well, that can't be right. And that's the first thing I remember. And somebody said, why not? I said, well, it can't be 8 o'clock in the morning, because time doesn't go backwards here. I was at the fitness center at 11, you know. And whoever it was, I assumed a doctor, said, well, it's 8 o'clock at night. And so I had this 8 hours, a little over 8 hours of time that I have absolutely no recall. And even now, a number of years later, I still don't. So in order to understand what happened during those 8 hours, I had to do some interviews. And after I was released from the hospital and went through several months of recovery, then I started to wonder why, because things were slowly starting to come back to me. Not what happened here, but what happened in that dimension. And it was then that the real confusion started, because none of it made any sense. And I likened it to I was like 1 foot in this dimension, and then I was 1 foot in this dimension right here, trying to almost have an energetic tug of war as to where I wanted to be. It was a time where not only the confusion, but the physical exhaustion from what happened. Essentially, what happened was that I had my heart stopped, and it took them over 6 minutes to restart it after a couple of electric shocks and also a lot of CPR. So once I was able to realize something significant happened, I did get a hold of the 11 people on the EMT squad, the hospital staff, the 11 people that were involved with my recovery, and I was able to sit and interview them to find out what happened in those 8 hours. Now, they all said that after they got my heart started again, it was shortly after that I started talking, answering questions. They were trying to keep me awake, apparently. One said, because you can have another relapse. And so they were very watchful of me. And understanding that I couldn't make sense of anything, they knew exactly what they did. They didn't know what the person next to them was doing, but they knew exactly what they did. And this was 7-8 months later when I started talking with them. So it was something that helped me try to understand what happened while I was in the fitness center. Which has led me to understand one thing, is that we are more than the sum of our parts. Our bodies are more than the sum of our parts, because I had the same body parts while I was standing looking at my arms that were tingling as I did when I was flat out on the floor, not breathing, and my heart stopped. Except for one thing. That part of me, that inner essence, you can call it your soul, you can call it your whatever, that had gone. And that's where I was up in this dimension. And that made sense to me, because once they got my heart started again, I had to come back. Or I had to not come back. Apparently that was my choice. So the whole episode of what I experienced there has created a better understanding for me of what not only lies ahead for me, but it lies ahead for everyone else that I talk to, whether they want to believe it or not. Because the one thing I learned is that we will continue to go on regardless of what we think here. And whether or not we want it to, we will still go on, because the innermost essence of us, the soul, if you will, is not destroyed. That continues. Now, we're going to slough off this body, because this body is not made for long-term use. So I've used an analogy. As I began to work through and understand these things. Okay, in 1951, for some reason that I'm not sure about yet, I decided to get off the energetic superhighway, drive down in the off-ramp, and came down into this lower level of energetic existence. I was born of my parents. I was raised by them, my family. I grew up with them. I'm now here 72 years, a little more, 73 coming up. But I won't be here forever. So when my body uses up its fuel and I depart for good, I'm going to get back on that on-ramp to the energetic superhighway, and I'm going to go on to my next experience, because I will still exist, only in a different form than what we see visually here. Each one of us has that divine spark, that DNA of the source of all creation, the God essence, if you will. We are all part of that, and that is why I do believe we will never be destroyed. Now, yes, this body's going to give way, but we will continue to go on. That is the hope that I think I'm trying to express to everyone, is that this is not the end of it, regardless of what you think, how times may not be very well for you at this moment. I'm not saying you should leave, but what I'm saying is that you have a choice to use the time here to enjoy it, to make the best of it. You don't have to throw it away because this life is good. This life is worth living. But yet, if things go haywire, uh, it's not the end of you. It's not the end of me. It's not the end of your family or your friends or even the people you don't even like, because they all have that same DNA essence of God. And God will accept them just like they did me. Now, I'm not, it took a long time to understand why I came back. But that's the essence of my experience while I was in a different dimension. And coming to this dimension, I had to take the form of a physical body because even though it's a lower energetic level than where I was, because I couldn't experience the same things, like the tactile things, the visual things, um, in the same way as if I came here as just uh, a spark as a spirit. I'm not saying that's bad. It's just that, well, our experience here is to uh, touch things, feel things, whether it's emotion, whether it's tactile, whatever. That's why we're here. We're here to learn. We sure as heck didn't come here to be destroyed or punished.
In 2017, I was the passenger in a car. We were driving on a high mountain road and I was with my ex-partner. Our car lost control. We started spinning out of control because another car came in our lane and we had nowhere to go. And we spun onto the gravel shoulder and then spun back into the road and hit a completely different car that was following the other car. And then we flipped upside down and landed with our wheels facing up, the roof crushed, and we were teeter-tottering on the edge of the mountain. So on the guardrail, half the car was hanging over the edge of the cliff and the other half was on the roadside. So what my experience was during this accident was as soon as the car lost control, just the split second I saw that we were going to be in a big accident, I closed my eyes just instinctively. I don't know why I did this, but I closed my eyes. I leaned back into my seat and I decided I would die peacefully. And the next thing I remember is losing my hearing. Now, this, I just want to say the accident was probably, 2 or 3 seconds of Earth time, but I spun out of my body into a dimension that had no time. So the first thing I remember was my hearing went away. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything. It was just black. And then I felt like I had no body. And it was just this super lightness, like I was just shooting up and out of my body into another place that I had never been. The next thing that I noticed was I had a sense of my surroundings, even though I couldn't see. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I could sense that I was kind of in a safe, dark, maybe pillowy, soft, feathery container that felt extremely secure. And when I kind of adjusted to being there and realized I didn't have a body, but I had 101% full awareness, I felt the presence of many, many beings around me. And like I couldn't exactly see and make them out at first, but they felt like they were sending me so much love. I felt like love and acceptance and familiarity was kind of beaming at me in all directions. And I realized that I was mostly just awareness and knowing, and all of my anxiety, all of my tension, all of my busy mind from Earth was completely gone. It's hard to kind of compare it to anything, but if you've ever kind of like woken up in the morning in a nice warm bed, maybe you're on holiday, maybe you're, sleeping in bed with someone you love, and it's that moment where you wake up and you're like, but it was like that times 1,000. And then I noticed that there was kind of like this familiarity of these beings, and I couldn't exactly place it, but I realized I'd been here before. I had passed through whatever place this was in the spirit world many times, and these beings that could have been angels or ancestors, I'm not sure, they all knew me and I knew them. And now, kind of after all this time reflecting, I consider that these were soul family of some sort in the spirit world who have known me in other lifetimes, who have known me in other dimensions besides Earth, who have always supported me and I've supported them. And so all of this happiness and love and acceptance and kind of excitement at the reunion was coming at me, and it was just taking up my whole awareness. And that's all that I was. There was no access, like I said, to my anxiety or my earthly hangups. I was just like them in that place. There was no way anything dark or difficult or sad could ever enter that place. It just would have been impossible. And I don't know how long in spirit world time I was there, but it seemed like a very long time, and there wasn't any words exchanged. It was kind of like this experience of remembering who I was, the real essence of the true self of me without all the human layers, and knowing that I have a unique place in the universe. I belong to this soul family. I belong in this dimension. There's probably, many dimensions beyond that in the spirit world, but that's where I got to be. And without any words exchanged or messages to bring back to humanity. So however long I was there in the spirit world time, I don't know. But at some point, I woke up in the car, hanging upside down over the cliff, and all I could see was upside down trees. And all I could hear was people yelling and then metal scraping, what in a car accident. And I was completely filled with bliss. Even though we'd been in this accident and I'm hanging upside down over the edge of a cliff, I did not care because I had just gone to what felt like the most familiar home I could ever imagine. I've never felt so at home anywhere on earth ever. And I realized that everything was going to be okay, no matter if I'm dead or alive, if I'm in the human body or outside of the human body. I am totally fine. And if anything, I'm more fine when I'm outside of the body because I got to be with all of these precious soul family members and feel their love.
When I was 17 years old, and the year was 1972, I went to a party, and at some point during the party, and I really don't know why this happened. I'm not claiming I went to the hospital and was diagnosed dead, but I must have either lost consciousness or I don't know what happened. But I started to move. Actually, to begin with, I heard a deep, deep rumbling. And this rumbling was really, really, it was not only low, it was vibrating through my body and through everything I could perceive. And it should have been scary, but it was just intriguing to me. It wasn't scary at all. And then suddenly, before I could think, I was moving through this black expanse, and I call it a tunnel now, but I wonder if that's just because what people have called it over the years. It was 1972, and I had nothing to call it then. And I'm moving really, really fast, and I don't know how fast. And up ahead, I can see a light way off in the distance, a very bright one, but it's not coming into this tunnel. And as I'm moving towards it, I have this thought that keeps going through my head. I'm about to learn the secret meaning of life. And it was just really, it was the only thought I had. So as I got near the exit, or what I would call the exit, the opening where the light began, I was above these valleys and these lush fields of flowers. And these flowers were gigantic, some of them. And there were rivers, but the flowers I particularly remember because they could have been 40, 50, I don't know, maybe 100 feet big. But I'm up above them and I'm looking down. So as I'm looking down at them, this music is filling the air. And I realize that it's coming from them and apparently from everything I'm seeing, and it's resonating within me. And as I look at them, they're moving. They actually have movement. And I understand, and I don't know why I understood, but I understood they were there to support me. So I continued to move forward at a rapid speed, but it was all very pleasing. It was all very comfortable. And up ahead on the right, I saw three tall, what I would call tall figures. And I think they were men and women. I don't really know which was which, but that's what I perceived. Because their features weren't really clearly delineated. As I looked at them, I could see that they were beings of light, I guess is what you would call it. And back behind them was that really bright light, but it was still off in a distance. But everywhere I was filled with light. And I wasn't aware that I had a body. I never saw hands, feet. I was aware. I felt exactly like I was there, like I do right now. But I just didn't have the ability to do this, nor was I trying to do it. And as I approached these three beings, they greeted me and they let me know that there was going to be a being of a very high order coming to meet me. And I was very excited. And I need to stop here and clarify something. I'm sure a lot of your viewers and yourself have probably heard this before, but there wasn't any language. Nobody's moving a mouth, and it's instantaneous communication. Not just instantaneous thought, but instantaneous understanding and comprehension. So I understood I was going to meet this being, and that bright light in the distance, which was brighter than all the light we had, started moving closer and closer to me until finally it was slightly above and in front of me. And I would say I perceived it as a male presence and very large, maybe, I don't know how large, 15 feet, 20 feet in height. But this light was being generated off of him. And it wrapped up everything, including myself. And it was, these parts are always hard to describe because all we have are words. But it was as if somebody was giving me the warmest greeting, hug, and love that I'd ever received in my life. It was all-encompassing. I was wrapped up in it, and my mind began to flood with all these questions. And I remember the being was very happy about it, not laughing at me, but really joyful would be the word. And I could sense the joy. I was part of that joy. And I started to rapid fire ask questions. And again, ask there, it was just, you began to think it, and then suddenly you had the answers. So hypothetically, if I thought about a drop of water, I would become the water. I would become the rain. I would become the ocean. I might become the clouds. I'm being hypothetical here. That wasn't one I asked that I recall. But at some point in these questions, I asked, what is the meaning of life? And the being communicated to me, and again, not a word, but the feeling, the comprehension and understanding that it was love. And I was only 17, and I knew love more of it as a concept. I didn't really have I loved my girlfriend, I loved my dog and those kinds of things, but I didn't understand until then that there could be some love that was so all-encompassing, so amazing. And when I understood that, when I instantly understood that, I just burst out in this total joy, and I sort of went up in the air. I say I did, but I guess it was my presence, my spirit, and I started doing these somersaults in the air, like in joy. And I remember he was laughing. He was like, but not. He didn't find it funny. He felt it great. And I remember one of the questions I had was, are there other forms of life outside of the earth? And before I could even finish thinking it, because I was always infatuated with that as a kid, I was infatuated with the concept that there might be aliens. And I went zooming, I don't know how fast, it seemed like through galaxies instantly. And I looked down on a couple of different civilizations. And one of these was very, they dressed in what I would call like Roman style garb. And another one I came to was more what I would consider modern. This is 1972. But I didn't really get to interact with any of them because I was watching from above. So unfortunately, I realized later I probably could have willed myself down there. I wish I had thought of that. But it verified for me that there were other creations outside of the earth. And at some point after this, I'm taken to a black expanse. Like if it's hard to picture, but and it sounds very kind of dreary, but it wasn't. It was fine. It was warm. But I'm in this middle of, I guess, what you would call outer space, and there were stars and all these things off in the distance. And I can't quite remember if the three beings and the presence I was describing to you came with me. I think at least the three beings did. But at any rate, I was there, and suddenly in front of me there was this, I guess what I would describe as a gigantic tablet spinning through space, and it stopped in front of me, and I saw the history of the world play out. And when I say I saw it play out, it was here and it was gone, but it was all absorbed by my knowledge. I could comprehend all of it, and I understood that I was linked to that event. To those events, that the whole world was linked to me, and I was linked to the whole world. Not in words, not like, well, this is why you're here and this is why they're there. I didn't really have that, but I had the very clear understanding that the world and I were not separate, and that everybody in the world and I were not separate. And I would just like to skip fast forward to, no, I don't recall how the world ends. A lot of people ask me that. What I was shown, I'm pretty convinced some of it was removed from me. I don't know that for a fact, but I believe that to be the case. But
let me.
Oh, go ahead.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, because you're on this point that you don't know how it ends, or you think some parts were kept from you. Was there anything that when you lived through it, you thought, well, I've seen this back then?
It all felt intimately familiar to me. I don't recall thinking to myself, oh, right, I remember being there for the Civil War, or I remember the creation of mountains or any of that. But it seemed normal. It seemed like, it didn't seem foreign to me. It did. And here's the weird thing. Well, there were a lot of weird things, but there was a lot of violence. And I remember seeing, and this is from a distance too, just like I was describing the planets. I remember seeing armies just rushing at each other, and death and violence. And I wasn't terrified, but it was shocking to see. So in all of this mix, well, if you could imagine seeing everything from the beginning of time and understanding everything from the beginning of time of the world, that's what I had absorbed. And what happens from here is I decided, well, I'm not leaving. And I somehow made that clear, or I thought I did. And I was told, no, you have to go back. You have a mission. And again, these aren't words. I'm using the word mission, a purpose. It was clear to me that they wanted me to go back. And I resisted that. And it was emphasized, you have a very important reason to go back, a mission. I call it a mission. And I got surrounded they weren't real close to me, but they weren't far either. And I've tried to figure out the amount. It was at least hundreds. It could have been thousands of these beings of light. And they began to sing to me, much like the flowers had, but this was much more incredible. Yeah. And they were singing spontaneously. They were singing in harmony with each other, but it was all, it was spontaneous. It was all happening at that moment. And I understood they were singing in support of me returning. So I guess at that point, I must have agreed. I don't really recall saying, yes, I'll go back. But the next memory I have of anything, and by the way, all of this, I always like to point out to people, was vividly clear. It wasn't, it wasn't foggy or dreamlike. And I've told people it was more clear than anything in my life, including right now, right here, the conversation I'm having. because I just want them to understand that this wasn't some kind of, I understand what people who haven't had this, I can understand how they could feel. I would probably be one of those people if it didn't happen to me. But the next thing I know, I'm in a bathroom in this apartment where I was at this party, and I had a razor blade, and I was trying to slash my wrist because I knew, and I don't know how I knew, that if I died, I would return. And I just want to put a little caveat here. I wasn't in despair. It was the exact opposite of despair. It was joy. And I was only 17, and I just wanted to go back. The human part of me wanted to go back and be that spirit again. And this is the only time I've had what I would call a mystical sort of thing happen. A very deep male resonant voice said, "No." I dropped the razor blade. Somebody knocked on the bathroom door, and they said, "Guys, he's in here." It was a couple of guys who were at the party, and they found me. And that was how I left that. That from there, I went on with my life. But I was only 17, and there was no way for me to understand what had happened, because this is 1972. I had a girlfriend, and I told her the story the next day, or that it was probably the next day. And she's now my wife. We've been married over 50 years now.
I had a burgeoning career as a singer, and I was on tour with the guitar player for Pearl Jam. We were in our own separate band, and we were in Brooklyn performing on stage when everything's going fine. And I noticed this man in the front, right in front of me in the audience, who hated the show and made sure I knew it by all his giant body language that was super negative, and he was just being him, whatever. But normally, number one, I don't see that. But even if someone looks bored or just not into it or whatever, you just let it go. If that person's not into it, that's fine. We were not Pearl Jam. And if they came to hear really heavy rock, we weren't that. So I thought, that's fine. But it didn't let go. My focus jammed onto this guy. So while I was performing, remembering lyrics, smiling, cueing with the band, all that, another part of my mind started going down this terrible whirlwind of negative thinking, all about myself. And it started about him, then it went to the band, and then it landed quickly onto me and how bad of a singer I am, and how come I'm even on stage, and I can't remember my lyrics, and it went on the entire show, worse and worse and worse. And I've described it before as it's like my consciousness was like sitting around like a radio, tuning it, and there's the channel that's the Let's Hate on Barber channel. And it was a stream, no commercial breaks. And it was just like a stream of negative thoughts. And it was disconcerting. And while I had that part of my brain doing that, the other part of my brain performing, a third part of my brain was like looking at all this from behind me, like a witness, the witness conscious. And it was saying, wow, look, you can do all this at the same time. Isn't that fascinating? What an interesting thing to be happening right now. And I was like, get me off this stage. So that night when I was laying in bed after the show, I started thinking about that. And I asked myself, are these thoughts happening all the time about myself and I'm just not aware of them? I have had therapy. I've done all sorts of things to help myself. I thought I was kind of over all that. To at least a degree. We all have our things, but this was really extreme. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I can't have this happen again. And I had this great idea. I was going to sign up for one of those camps where you go and you push your boundaries and you develop courage. And I thought that'll just knock them right out. This will be great. So when I got home, I researched and I found this camp and I signed up. And it was months later that it was starting. And I somehow suckered my best friend into going with me. And it was in a very remote area of Vancouver, BC, Canada. This was before cell phones. This is 2010. So even if there were cell phones, though, we were such in a remote area, it would not have had a signal. That's how remote it was. And we brought our tents and loaded all this stuff. We were going to be there for a week. We signed liability forms that were terrifying. Just non-disclosure forms, so I can't, I feel obligated to not express exactly what happened there, but every night there was sleep deprivation, so I slept 3 hours a night. There was extensive lecturing that was repetitive and ongoing while you're tired. I don't think that's a very kind way of helping people gain knowledge. There was dealing every day was like dealing with fire and heights and blindfolds and scary people that threaten you so that you gain resilience and being like attacked on a street or something like that. But, you know, none of us had any clue what we were getting into. They purposely will not tell you. And so when, for instance, a scary man appears and starts attacking you, you're going, WTF, you know? And then you find out you're supposed to be learning something from it. It was not, in my mind, I would not have led a camp like this, let's just say. But I will say every night I was celebrating because I made it through another day and I did a good job. And I was gaining courage, and I just felt like in some freaked out way, I was getting stronger. Well, the last day was an endurance exercise out in the sun and carrying heavy things that was timed. You couldn't slow down at all. And I was doing fine. I had a teammate with me until about halfway. And then I started noticing really odd symptoms like really shaky legs, flashes of light, echoey sounds. Sounds did not sound normal anymore. Started getting more and more and more scary, and like the senses were colliding and just really not acting like normal senses. None of them. This woman I was teamed with said, "Are you all right?" And I kept trying to hide it from her because she was a little timid and things, and I was trying to be strong for both of us. And so instead I would say, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I drink way more water because I thought I was getting dehydrated. Well, it turns out that was not a good idea because I was suffering from two things at once. One was heat stroke from all that sun beating down. The second one was really important for my personal body, and that was hyponatremia, which is when you wash all the sodium out of your blood. So every time I drank more water, I was washing more sodium out. I was sweating all week, so I was washing it out. And like marathoners die of this because of the extreme physical exertion in the sun. So I barely made it to the end, but I did make it back. And that I'll never forget the image I see in my mind's eye as I'm approaching the finishing line, because there were people on either side of the finishing line cheering us on. But they looked like out of a nightmare. They were strobing. The sounds were going da 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 da. There's just scary sounds, flashes of light. I was shaking in my entire body. I was like, I'm going to faint. So I asked for a medic. I said, tell someone I'm going to faint. Well, no, they couldn't find anyone. They said, just lay down. Like, that's how helpful these people were. Turns out they did not have a proper medic at this place. The person that did come to help me was so scared when he saw me. And later when my friend found me, she said my skin was gray. I had these vacant eyes with dark circles under them. I couldn't walk by myself anymore. I was really out of it. And the man took, blood pressure and all this stuff, and he was just looking terrified. He did give me electrolytes though, and that contained some salt. So maybe from a physical level, that's what kept me alive. In the long run, I don't know. He said, let's take you back to your tent and have you just lie down. Well, it was too hot to be in my tent, so now I'm laying under a tree with my best friend at my side, just kind of closing her eyes and doing Reiki on me and stuff. And the first thing that started happening was this terrifying sensation of my left leg disappearing from my experience. I couldn't feel it anymore. I couldn't feel weight or volume or heat or anything. And I started kind of screaming and telling my friend, my leg is gone, my leg is gone. And then my right leg, same thing happened. And then one at a time, each of my arms. So I felt like I was a torso and a head, helpless under this tree. And that, I cannot tell you how frightening that felt. So at that moment, in the midst of this very heightened sense of fear and helplessness, that's the word, this image, this movie started playing. That was from, you could call it a memory, but it was not anything like any memory. But it was something that happened 2 weeks earlier when I was rehearsing in a different band with my brother, and he and I had gotten into an argument. And during this movie, it's playing, and I'm looking at it, as Barbara is looking at it, but I'm also in it at the same time and re-experiencing it. So there was these two levels of perception going at once. My eyes were closed, I think. And it started playing, and unlike a memory that is spotty and has holes in it and is not a fluid image like a movie, this one was, everything was exactly as it had happened and clear as a bell. And at one moment during this argument where I was really silent, he was doing his loud thing and I was doing my silent thing. And I kind of shut down in that moment in the movie, in the memory or whatever. And the movie I was watching freeze framed at that moment. And a voice, a male, neutral, kind, gentle voice I'd never heard before in my head said, what were you thinking at that moment, at that freeze frame? And that startled me enough to think about it and crying and stuff. And I answered it, and the movie went away. And a new movie kind of slid in off the screen of my perception and started playing from a month earlier. And that one freeze framed at this moment that I looked down. And that at that moment it said, what were you thinking that made you look down? And I answered, and it went off. Another one came. I raised my eyebrow. It said, freeze framed. What were you thinking that made you raise your eyebrow? What does that mean? What did that mean? And I answered, and this went on, Sabrina, for several hours. All these tiny moments in my adult life, on and on and on, all these relationships where there was a little conflict, or there was a moment I was comparing myself to someone else, and I maybe walked into a party or something and thought, oh, they're all so successful or beautiful, and I'm so whatever I am, at the moment. And it would stop. It was amazing. So it wasn't necessarily moments with every other person. It might have been a moment with my own self, but they were always about my thoughts. A few were about my emotions, but they were always connected to thoughts. This went on, like I said, for several hours. While this was going, and this began right when these movies started, I started feeling the sensation of air puffing out of my head. And I had read enough about spiritual things to know that your life force, when you're dying, leaves the top of your head. And so when I started feeling that, I started feeling a little more nervous that maybe whatever is happening to me is more dangerous than I'm just a rest is going to do. But anyway, that kept going over these hours. And as it was going, I was leaving my body basically and moving in towards death. Now I'm tearing up here because at one moment these movies stopped, and the voice that was talking to me said, "Barbara, you have a choice now. Would you like to stay or go?" And I knew that meant, would I like to continue dying, or do I want to come back into my body? And again, why I am tearing up is because at this moment I had one foot in this world, one foot in the other world. And the feeling on the other world is so beyond what we call love that there are not words to describe it. And every time I bring it up, I tear up because I'll never forget that feeling. It's the most beautiful, comforting, welcoming, non-judgmental, non-critical, pure love, kindness, every possible thing you could want, all mixed up into one sensation. And it's in the pores of that atmosphere there. And I could feel it in my body. I could feel it, well, not in my body, but in my whole system while I was partially in there. I didn't 100% leave my body. I was at that cusp, and I was leaning towards going because that feeling was so incredible. And I'll tell you, it knocked any fear I have about dying. And I always have to say, not necessarily the fear of dying, like the movement towards dying where the body's shutting down. That does not sound very fun to me. I've experienced that, and it's not great. But the actual crossover, no fear at all. It's a welcoming, beautiful place. So I was leaning towards that. But there's aspects of life that I enjoy, many aspects. I love eating. I love kissing. I love nature. I love petting dogs. I love hanging out with my good friends. I love stretching in the morning. There's so many beautiful things about being here and about seeing the beautiful aspects of our life here on Earth. And what an amazing gift that we have to be here, even though it is freaking hard here so much of the time. So I was playing with these ideas in my head when I had this choice. So I talked with this voice about it, and we had a conversation about whether I wanted to come back or not, and what it would mean, and what would I do here, to make it more pleasurable and joyful for me. At the end of that discussion, which maybe we'll touch on later, I said I would like to go back to Earth, my body, And the voice said, okay, then you need to do something. For the very first week you get back, you need to contact these 4 people. And you need to tell them, 2 of them I had to tell them how much I loved them. This is not the kind of thing that you say, I know you already know I love you, but I just want to reiterate. It was not like that. It was like, we're going deep, sister. We're going to say why you love that person. What has their presence meant to you in your life? What have you learned from them? What do you admire most about them? And I mean the deep stuff. And I needed to do that with 2 people. Another person, I also needed to apologize for something. Another person, I needed to really, truly, deeply express gratitude in the same way, this depth of gratitude, what it meant to me, what this person had done for me. And the last person, I was supposed to just call on the phone every single week, even if for a couple minutes, to start rebuilding a connection. And I'll tell you, Sabrina, that connection grew so fast and so profoundly into such an amazing, beautiful connection again after years of being separated. It was really, really nice. So I said I'd do that. The moment I said that, I felt that puffy feeling of the life force leaving. It re-entered. It would change direction, started going back into me. I could feel it. And then one at a time, all my limbs came back. And after literally just a few minutes, I opened my eyes. Now the sun had gone down, and it was this golden, amazing hue everywhere. And the grass color, and this giant bumblebee buzzing around a flower, and my friend's hair, and her face with her eyes closed, praying for me. This place is amazing. And I know it's hard. I know it. And I will tell you that I've heard at least three different near-death experiencers say that when they fully crossed over, they saw a line of souls lined up to get here. Because this is the place everyone wants to be. This is the place that you go when you are ready to really do your hardcore work so you can do some massive ascending. So anyone who's watching this, give yourself a massive pat on the back for even agreeing to come here, or not agreeing, you wanted to come here. You wanted to deal with whatever it was to grow astronomically as a soul. And some people say, and I tend to agree with them, what's happening right now is so bizarre, vast. I'm sensing an awakening coming. The people that are here now have got the freaking lottery ticket. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it has been easy. But as far as one of the most tremendous times I can ever imagine being alive, it would be now. And so when I opened my eyes, I was seeing the world in a way that I hadn't since probably a child. These eyes of wonderment, and everything seemed just sizzling with extraordinariness. This place is really weird when we stop just noticing it as if it's always there. But really, every morning we awaken from a mini death, and you can open your eyes and look at your room and start going, wow, that plant, what is a plant? Does it have consciousness? Does it, just get into something so slowly that it suddenly has magic and wonderment again. So I was that way for a month, where everything was new. it was a serious rebirth feeling it was like being a baby, but the adult consciousness. And best of all, I didn't have my negative thoughts anymore. Not that self-doubt, not that self-criticism. More importantly, even for me, was worry. I worried all the freaking time. That was gone for a month. I was smelling flowers all the time. I was speaking really authentically and honestly with the people and lovingly. I was appreciating people and everything, food and music I heard in my body, whole body. It was incredible.
I am from Iowa. I'm a latchkey kid from Iowa. I had countless encounters with ETs, angels, UFOs as a child. I always saw lights, what we call the energetic field, the aura around people. I had experiences with the other dimensional realities, especially in my dream state. And I would know things about people. I would know what they were feeling before they knew what they were feeling. And unfortunately, I was told, that I was crazy. Don't talk about that. Why do you know that? Don't tell anyone else. My father, who was a holy roller, a Jesus zealot, he always told me that I was possessed. It becomes very confusing to have all these experiences, especially as a kid, a child, a teenager, knowing all this stuff and always being ridiculed or shamed for having all these insights. By the time I was 12 or 13 years old, I was drinking alcohol, doing drugs because I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to know stuff anymore. I just wanted to numb it out. I wanted to tune it out. It became overwhelming, and it was just really, it was hurtful, to be told that you were crazy all the time. At a high school party when I was 16 years old, it was 38 years ago around this time, at the Canterbury Inn in Coralville, Iowa. I was at a high school party with a lot of all my friends were older than me. And I thought I was going to be cool that night. So I was trying to impress my older classmates. So I chugged a fifth of vodka, 4 beers, 2 glasses of wine, and about 3 or 4 wine coolers in about 90 minutes. My classmates were all around me as I was downing the vodka, going chug, chug, go, 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 go. Needless to say, my body went into cardiac arrest. I died from acute alcohol poisoning. My skin was black, green, and purple. And all of a sudden I found myself outside of my body trying to get my classmates' attention. And anyone that's had a near-death experience will tell you that when you first leave your body, it's frightening. It's scary because you all of a sudden realize that you're not there anymore. You're outside of your body. You're trying to get people's attention and no one hears you. And then I was greeted by my grandfather, Russell. He passed away around when I was between 2 and 3 years old. And he said, Mark, you're going home now. So I guess I was under the impression that, I screwed up. I guess this is it. And that's when I went into the light. He kind of guided me into the light where I was greeted by 7 angels. They were 14 feet tall in appearance. Also, again, anyone that's had a near-death experience will tell you, you do this thing called a life review. You review your life, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Anytime that I was angry, resentful, or blamed other people, and that's, of course, all that you do when you're a teenager. They asked me, how does that relate to love? And everything in life is our opportunity to express love. Forgiveness is for giving your love away no matter what happens to you. And if you're always forgetting the car, the accolades, the house, the Rolex watch, whatever it may be, you're out forgetting things. You are forgetting who you really are. Again, this is a multi-dimensional experience, parallel lives, parallel universes, and it's all simultaneous. So as Russell was kind of telling me that I was going on, they introduced me to a being that was around 30 feet tall. And this being had a lot of love for me, a lot of compassion, and it knew kind of everything about me. Then they talked to me a lot about sacred geometry, healing through sound, vocal toning, and the Melchizedek priesthood. The 30-foot being formed an icosahedron, which is a platonic solid, and entered my heart. And that's what brought me back to life. An instant, like a flash, the soul that was in my body from the time that I was conceived to 16 went with my grandfather Russell, and this 30-foot being came into my heart and brought me back to life. I was completely comatose, unconscious, dead, lifeless, whatever you want to call it. I was out for around 22 minutes. I mean, that's what I've been told many times in my dreams. The first few days was very confusing. Everyone seemed like they were this big to me, especially my mom. And I really kind of didn't know where I was at. And around the fourth day, the memories of Mark, who I was a sophomore at Iowa City West in Iowa City, Iowa, and everything kind of clicked back into place. That's what happened. And I've told this story since 1997. I've not changed the story. I will never change the story because that's what happened to me.
But do you feel any pressure, or did you feel any pressure back then from people not believing your story or doubting it? Did you, especially because you were just in university, right? So you must have been around 20 years old.
No, I was 16.
There you go.
Yeah. So to answer your question is that I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell anyone what happened to me that night. I think around 1992, 93, 6, 7 years after that, I told the girl I was dating in Charleston, South Carolina at the time, Kirsten. I told my best friend, Dean, who's a chiropractor and acupuncturist. They were the only two people that knew about what had happened to me. As a child, I would dream over and over again. Anytime I wanted to feel loved, anytime that I wanted to feel belonged, Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, Disneyland. I didn't go to Disneyland until I was like 37 years old, but I would dream about those things. I'd find myself inside my bedroom closet. Anytime I wanted to feel special, like I belonged, that I would find myself in my dreams inside that bedroom closet in Iowa City, Iowa, where I grew up at. Well, almost 10 years after my near-death experience, I got a phone call from a woman I never met, I never spoke with before. I really don't know how she got my number. And she described verbatim in detail my near-death experience, that they talked to me about sacred geometry, healing through sound, the Melchizedek priesthood. And then she went on to describe that dream I had over and over again as a child, that I was inside my bedroom closet a lot, where I found love. And of course, 40 some years later, you realize that the dream was about remembering that everything that you want is inside here, the closet of your own heart. So the woman I met, I'll just say her name was Deb. We met about a year or so later, and she was a real person. Unfortunately, I've not heard anything from her since around 1999.
But why did she contact you?
According to her, she was told by her angels to call me, to talk to me.
And it was just so that you could not necessarily remember, but was it your impulse to share your experience?
No, the message was for me to get out and talk about it, for me to get out and check to me. I have this real powerful gift with sound that I didn't understand, that I wasn't aware of at the time. Like in 93, 94, 95, when I was down in Charleston the first time, we were experimenting with toning and sound. And that was kind of when the book Bringers of the Dawn by Barbara Morrisson came out, which is a phenomenal book about the planet being a matrix and influences and altercations by ETs and things like that. Around that time is when the tone started coming through me. And then she was like, yeah, you got to get out and talk and present this information. So a year after that, in fact, August 17th of 1997, I spoke in front of about 150, 200 people about my near-death experience and about the vocal toning that I do. And then I did expos and conferences from 97 to 2017, 20 years or so.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now, also wanted to unpack, so you mentioned sound being healing, and I want to dive a bit deeper into that. And then you also talked about sacred geometry. So can we start with sound and understand a bit of why is sound healing? What kind of sounds? What can we do?
Edgar Cayce, the famous psychic, said that sound would be the healing modality of the future. We know that medical doctors today will use sound waves, sound frequencies to break up gallstones and kidney stones. Greg Braden, the famous author, has shown on an ultrasound video 3 Chinese healers doing Qigong and doing vocal toning and chanting. They dissolve a golf ball sized tumor in about 3 minutes, because sound is a pure frequency. It's a higher vibration. And what happens is, like, you have a cancer tumor that's a dense vibration, it breaks it up, almost like a soprano. An alto soprano can use their voice to break up glass. Well, this is why sound is so important. Just look at the word universe. The word universe means one song. The word person is Greek for persona, through sound. So if you look at all the masters' names, Jesus' name wasn't Jesus, it was Yeshua or Yeshuva, Sai Baba, Mir Baba, Yogananda. They all have the sound in it at the end, right? There's a man by the name of Hans Jens who did cymatics, and he showed that when you run a sound wave or a frequency through a sand filing or like little pieces of magnets, they all form specific geometric patterns. With the sound and geometry, you're combining a really powerful healing resonance. So Hans Jens showed, that this is very true, that everything in nature is based on sound, frequency, and geometries. What happened with me is that these pure tones were coming through me and having a really profound effect on people. The Native Americans, specifically the Anasazi and Hopi, talked about how that the elders would sing to crops of corn and they'd produce kernels of corn the size of most men's thumbs. James Redfield in the book Celestine Prophecy talks about singing to your plants and allowing your plants to grow. So everything is based on frequency. This is why sound is so important to you and me and to the planet, is that there's a farmer in Wisconsin called Dan Carlson, and Dan Carlson became interested in sound and healing through Rife technology because his wife had cancer, and Rife technology is based on aligning frequencies, to help dissolve tumors, and that's what helped heal her. And he became fascinated because he was aware of Hans Jens' work with cymatics. He started playing around with frequencies and things like that. And he found that when he ran a 4,000 to 5,000 hertz frequencies through his crops, that they produced a 400% greater yield. Now, I didn't say 30 or 40% greater yield. I'm talking 400% greater yield running the sound wave through the crops. And it happened time and time again. So he became fascinated with things in nature, wanted to see what they were vibrating at. Well, he found that when birds chirp in the morning, they're singing between 4,000 and 5,000 hertz frequency. So birds are literally bringing life into the planet every morning that they sing. And then crickets, they chirp about 2,000 cycles per second. And they kind of close everything down at night. So again, everything is based on harmonics, frequency, and energy in the planet.
So what can we then practically do? Because I imagine you said tumors have a very dense vibration. So I can imagine we have a vibration. We can be lower on the vibrational scale if we're sad, if we're anxious, if we're depressed. We can be higher if we're in gratitude. What are practical things that we can do to improve our lives, or maybe just to be even more practical, our mood?
Jonathan Goldman, who's probably the most well-known sound healer on the planet, he and I did a conference together in Sedona back in 2007, and then we met again in Santa Fe a year or two later at a Sound and Consciousness conference. And I think he's 120% correct that everything is about intent. So what someone can do to raise their vibration or to heal something within them, they're playing around with chanting or toning or whatever it may be, is that you just would say something like, it's my intent with this sound that I create a healing within my body. And you can make any sound you want. Oh. Back to the ah sound and cymatics. They found that when you do the ah sound, ah, and you run that through an oscillator, that sound produces the Sri Yantra symbol. The Sri Yantra is the Hindu symbol of God. It's the 27 interlaced triangles. That frequency produces that symbol each and every time. Those things like that are just really powerful tools to help someone transform their own consciousness. But it's the intent that you put behind the sound that's the most important. It doesn't really matter if you can sing like Pavarotti or not, it's all about the intent behind the sound, and that you give it the intent and the vibration, the direction, because the intent and the sound interact with each other.
And I have heard that in yoga, you have the Om sound, and it's also meant to, if you do it like really long, it's something that just calms the nervous system, I think.
Yeah, it's very common because the Om puts you kind of in that center point, the 0 point, or the void. It allows you to go to relax. And in presenting this since 1997, we've seen over and over again, when I do the vocal toning, people call me a human singing bowl because that's what I sound like. I sound like one of the crystal bowls. And we've seen over and over again, it just calms everyone. And everyone just creates a field of stillness. The first documentary that was done about my work was called The Sound of Stillness, because that's what I call it, because that's what it produces. It's people don't sleep at night because they carry all their stress or anxiety in their energy field. And they're in this inner battle with their energy field because they hold on to all this stuff. Neuromagic used a $40,000 computer software program in Sedona, Arizona, to measure the effects of my toning on brain waves. And it found that it would put the theta waves, delta waves, gamma waves, all in the correct, and alpha waves all in the correct ratio, which helps what people who have insomnia relax and sleep better at night, because it clears your energy field. The other thing that we saw over and over again, and it didn't matter if I had 4 people or 400 people in the room, that the tones that came through me go to each individual person's greatest point of pain. And we saw it time and time again. And usually after about, 15, 20 minutes of doing the tone, people would they'd be out, like a hypnotist goes, sleep, and people, because it enables someone to relax and let go.
Wow, that's amazing. Just to clarify something about the alpha and beta and theta waves, is that something that each of us have, or do they just exist around us? Are we able to influence them in any way?
The brain waves are different. There's alpha, beta, delta, and gamma waves. Beta is waking state, like you and I are in, talking right now. Alpha and theta, you get into more of the deeper creativity, the relaxation state, or when we go into REM sleep at night, they produce more of the theta waves. And then the gamma waves relate to higher states of consciousness that, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about. If you really want to get into higher states of consciousness, it's about the gamma waves, which is around 40 hertz.
Yeah, I've been looking into him a lot. I really love what he's talking about. It does feel, I think, at times, at least for myself, a bit complex to really follow it and to take practical advice from. I don't know if I'm the only one feeling that, but yeah.
Yeah, he has a lot of information, no doubt about it. He's really good, though. But yeah, you have to be really patient with yourself and realize that he's a pretty smart guy, and you got to be patient. And sometimes you got to listen to him over and over again for it to kind of click on.
So what I also wanted to ask you is, I've been seeing online a trend around binaural beats. Can you explain for our audience, what is that? Is it helpful? Is there any point where I should just search for it on Spotify and play it if I'm anxious? Does it help at all?
So yeah, binaural beats just basically introduce one beat at a different rate, and then they play another beat at either a higher or lower rate. And what happens, because we're listening to, we listen to a beat, bum 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 bum. I've tried to play drums a few times, whether it's 4/4 time or 16th notes or quarter notes, 8 notes, whatever it may be. Phil Collins was one of the few drummers that could play quarter notes on his left hand and 16 notes on his right hand, which that is a trick in itself. One hemisphere of your brain is listening to 16 notes, and the left other hemisphere is listening to quarter notes. It creates a confusion in your brain that all it does is it relaxes because it surrenders. It drops you into a relaxed state. So that's what binaural beats. And Kelly Howe probably has more CDs, MP3 downloads with binaural beats than anyone else that I know of. The Monroe Institute in Virginia or West Virginia, they were kind of the first ones to really come out with the binaural beats. I mean, there's so many mind-brain entrainment programs out there. There's all kinds of stuff on YouTube that's free. Amazon Music, YouTube, it's free. Amazon Music, you got to pay for a subscription, but they're all out there, and they are very beneficial to help people relax. We are so busy. Go here, go do this, must be there. We're on our phones or whatever it may be, that we forget to be still. Being still is a strange concept to someone in the Western mind, but yet, that's where the real magic happens, is when your body is still and you can listen to your inner voice, listen to your heart, listen to those divine messages from within.